So thank you, Secretary Hobbs, for joining us. Obviously, just yesterday, the Supreme Court decision came down in Brnovich, and I thought we'd start with that. What's your reaction to the ruling that came down right down 6-3 conservative super majority lines?
Of course, I'm very disappointed. And I think the biggest thing is that this really underscores the need for federal legislation to protect the freedom to vote for every American. Because, we're seeing on the heels of what was widely touted as a very successful election in the face of multiple challenges across the country. We saw the most secure election we've had. And um, with historic participation. And despite that, folks who are not happy with the result are using misinformation about the election to make it harder for people to vote. And what this decision does is make it harder for people who are getting these additional barriers put in front of them to challenge those barriers in court. And so we need federal protection for Americans to be able to continue to have access to the ballot.
Mm. And of course, I believe President Biden and Vice President Harris echoed what you were saying right now, the need for Congress to step in to fill in the gap, as it were, left by the gutting of the VRA further in this decision. So in terms of you had mentioned that a lot of this had spurred from the allegations of fraud across the country. None of them held up in court.
Right.
It seemed even the majority said that the fraud concerns could justify the state interest. What's your reaction to the majority ruling so far as that goes?
Well, and I just want to clarify. I don't think you said this, but I just want to make sure it's clear. This case was already ongoing prior to the election, prior
Of
to
course.
all of this pushback on voting access. But for us here in Arizona in particular, it was always a backdrop to everything else that's going on in light of the election. The fact of the matter is these laws have been in place, but they are unnecessary. And the folks who made the arguments in favor of upholding these laws, and not only upholding the laws, but gutting the Voting Rights Act even further than it already has been, they're going to tout this as a win for election integrity. And that is just absolutely not the case. These laws are unnecessary, and there was nothing, they weren't doing anything to prevent any kind of fraud. And so, that they just erect unnecessary barriers between voters and the ballot.
And Justice Kagan said in her dissent, in fact, that fraud allegations, concerns have always been used to justify voting restrictions historically. If you can give me an update, obviously you're running for governor. You are at the center of what is an effort to so-called audit the election results that have been audited. What is the latest in that?
Well, it sounds like they have wrapped up. Well, they were supposed to wrap up work in the Coliseum this week. It sounds like at this point they've moved things to another building at the fairground site. And I think there's a lot of reasons that they don't have a clear end date. The first one being that they don't know what they're doing and they're making this up as they go along. But the second thing is that the longer they drag this out, the more they're able to continue to fundraise with it. And so, it's benefiting them to keep it going on longer. But the bottom line is that, and we have made this very clear from day one, that this is not a real audit. And we know that, not just because we're saying that, but because we've had independent election experts in the room seeing what's going on. There's been press seeing what's going on. And they had to disclose their procedures. That minimum level of transparency happened because we had to go to court to force it. And so we've been able to say from the beginning that this isn't a real audit. And so yeah. So in terms of the end game, it sounds like they're planning to have a report sometime in the next couple of months. But there's nothing we've seen throughout this whole process that would lend any credibility to anything that report says in terms of a real election audit.
Mm. And obviously, you had fought in the post-election cycle to against other challenges to the election there, and you won. None of the allegations there were substantiated
Right.
in the slightest. Uh, in terms of what followed that, can you had obviously the House or I'm sorry, the state Republicans there tried to strip you of your powers. And then very shortly after, you decided to run for governor. Any kind of causal relationship there?
No, no. I mean, I think that all of this is a backdrop to the fact that we need leadership in Arizona that isn't being driven by conspiracy theories and out of touch with everyday Arizonans. And everything we're seeing with this audit and all of the post-election hoopla over nothing, there's no evidence of any of what they're saying. Certainly indicates that we need better leadership in Arizona. And I'm someone with a track record, even before I became Secretary of State, of getting the job done. When I was in the legislature, in the minority, I was able to work across party lines to do things like ending the backlog of untested rape kits in the state, to expand Medicaid to provide healthcare for hundreds of thousands of Arizonans, to tackle the opioid epidemic head on. These are real issues that Arizonans care about, not continuing to rehash an election that was over 7 or 8 months ago. Can't even keep track of the time anymore. And that's why I decided to run for governor.
Mm. If elected governor, will you be able to fight back in a different way so far as the election integrity efforts go? That now that the Republicans in Arizona have tried to uh, limit the
Mhm.
power of the Arizona Secretary of State to actually combat these efforts. Will you be able, from the perch of governor, to defend election integrity in the same way?
Absolutely. I will absolutely always continue to stand up for the integrity of the systems that we already have in place, that have worked well for Arizona voters for decades, and that worked well in the 2020 election, and work to push back on these conspiracy theories and the use of these conspiracy theories to justify putting additional burdens on voters.
And in your video announcing your gubernatorial run, you mentioned, of course, there were threats against you as there were against any officials across the country that defended the integrity of the election. Has the continuation of this with this cyber ninjas firm continued to stoke this public hatred that election officials and public officials across the country have been experiencing?
Yes, it has.
Can you go into that?
There's been continued the level of harassment and just attacks on my office from every angle has not let up, and there are renewed threats, leading to me having to have a security detail for the second time. It's not part of my job to have that, but it's the second time in the last 6 months that it's happened.
I'm so sorry to hear that. In terms of, and this happened around the time of this audit heating up as well.
Yes. Yeah.
My God. Uh, and can you talk to me? Obviously, there have been so many strange things about this so-called audit, whether searching for bamboo fibers or a secret so-called lab that CNN traced. What were some of the most strange lowlights of this effort that you've observed?
Well, I think the biggest issue here is the firm that the Senate chose to lead this effort, and that makes it clear that this is being driven by a partisan agenda and not an agenda that's focused on real election integrity and improving voters' confidence in the system. They hired the cyber ninjas, which are not election experts or auditors. And many of the things they're doing, like you mentioned, searching for bamboo fibers, looking at folds in the paper, this is all based on unfounded conspiracy theories about how there was fraud in the election and not on the reality of how elections work, how we carry them out, why the paper might have different folds or whatever. I mean, it's just these people are making stuff up and using this audit as a way to kind of test their theories, and which are baseless, and grift off of it as well. I mean, we know that they're raising money off of it, and we knew this from the beginning, that these folks didn't know what they were doing. And as I mentioned, had to go to court to force the level of transparency that there is. And so when they did have to disclose their procedures, it was glaringly evident that they didn't know what they were doing. The procedures were minimal at best and uninclusive of any sort of best practices that you would see in a post-election audit, regarding how they were doing things in terms of counting the ballots, regarding security measures that should be in place. We noted, so the observers noted that there were often changes to the procedures, which was leading to confusion and errors, but also there were inconsistencies in how they were tallying the ballots at the individual tables, and then they were aggregating those, and there was inconsistencies there. I mean, so many things that would even if they weren't intentionally trying to cook the books, then it would lead to inaccurate results. But they're not trying to validate the election results. They're trying to continue to stir chaos and doubt in the system and in the election results. And in the process, continuing to drive threats against me and, undermining my integrity and who knows what else. I mean, these people think that Donald Trump's going to be back in the White House sometime in the fall. And we saw what they did on January 6th. What are they going to do when that doesn't happen?
And the firm is tied to other purveyors of the very same conspiracy theories. There's been reporting that the Cyber Ninjas leader, Doug Logan, is tied to Lynn Wood, who one of his Kraken lawsuits hit Arizona courts as well. In terms of the kind of, you have said a number of times, even during our interview, that this effort is entirely illegitimate, and you are challenging it through the channels. You went to the courts. In terms of the strategy of what are some of the challenges in fighting a effort that does not have legitimacy? Is there a danger of investing legitimacy of it by challenging it in that direction? If that question is at all clear.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a couple thoughts on that. I think, first of all, the thing that repeatedly gets thrown at me and other folks who are trying to fight this is, if you have nothing to hide, what are you afraid of? And, I think the folks who believe that are going to believe whatever result they come up with. They're not going to believe what I say no matter what. This idea of a forensic audit is really something that they made up. And we do post-election audits. There are post-election audit best practices, and that's not what this is. And the audits that we do are more than sufficient to provide certainty that the results of the election that we certified are accurate. And the bottom line is that this kind of situation is really not contemplated. It's not contemplated in Arizona statute, and certainly a lot of other states. And so I think you see states with Democratic majority legislatures, or where the chief election officer of the state has more authority, who can pass laws or make rules that say this isn't going to happen. And states like Arizona that's trying to put this kind of post-election forensic audit into statute. And it's just dangerous. We're utilizing so many resources to try to combat this right now, resources that need to be dedicated to preparing for the 2022 election. It's not something we just start, oh yeah, the election's a couple months away, let's get ready. We are focused on that right now, and this is just consuming a lot of resources.
And one of those resources is the election infrastructure itself, which can you talk to me about how the fact that they've taken custody of some of this equipment has led to the need for investing in untainted equipment. Isn't that correct?
Right. And so, some of the pushback to our office's response saying we're going to decertify this equipment has been, well, if you can't test it now to make sure it's accurate, how do you know that the tests before worked? And the fact of the matter is, it's not about the test, it's about the chain of custody. And this guidance is not guidance that we made up. This guidance came from CISA, and it's specific to the loss of chain of custody of election equipment by certified election officials. And as soon as that equipment got handed over, that chain of custody was lost. And not only was it lost and the people handling it don't know what they're doing, but it was kept in a way that we didn't know what was going on with it. The people that have access to the audit didn't have access to the room with the equipment in it. The cameras weren't in there. But even if they were, we still have no way of knowing what was done. And so it's not about testing whether or not it works. We just have no way to know what was done to it. And it's that loss of chain of custody that's the issue here, because when we have the equipment in the hands of, say, Maricopa County, it is stored, and there are specific requirements for how and where it's stored and who has access to that. And when they have access, logging that access. So there's never a question of who was near this equipment. We know that the machines are never connected to the internet. Anytime data is removed from one machine, it's a brand new thumb drive is used. We source those thumb drives so that we know they're coming from a reliable place. And none of those things were in place. Additionally, we documented in the last couple of days that while they were moving a pallet of equipment, it was actually tipped over and a bunch of it was damaged. So they're not even taking their custodial responsibilities seriously in terms of, these are assets that belong to the taxpayers.
Are you worried that this is becoming increasingly a national model for other kind of radical state lawmakers that are trying to follow the suit of this cyber ninjas farce?
Yeah, I mean, I cringe every time I hear Arizona style audit repeated in other states. I mean, it just, because this is not, and the Senate president, the CNN reporter that's been on the ground here was finally able to corner the Senate president, and she said, we're setting the gold standard here, and there's nothing gold or standard about what is happening here, nor should there be in terms of anything we do related to elections in the future.
And in terms of your priorities, if elected governor, what will they be?
Well, I think the biggest thing here right now, and I'm in the middle of this, I know that this election is not going to be about the 2020 election, but what's clear right now is that our state is being run by conspiracy theorists who are out of touch with everyday Arizonans. And we need to put the partisan differences aside and tackle real issues that are priorities for Arizonans, investing in our schools, continuing to improve the economy and create jobs and get Arizonans back to work as we're recovering from the pandemic. We have infrastructure improvements that we need to invest in: roads, broadband, fire prevention. The experts are predicting that we're not even going to have a wildfire season anymore. There's just wildfires. We have 22 of them going on in the state right now. And tied to that is water. There's water's an issue in and of itself, but right now the helicopters with the buckets are having trouble scooping up water to pour over the fires because of the low levels in a lot of our reservoirs that they use for that. And so we have a lot of real problems. The 2020 election is not one of them. And most Arizonans are pretty tired of that. So I'm going to work with whoever's willing to get the job done, Democrats, Republicans, to make Arizona the best place in the country to live, work, and raise a family.
Thank you very much, Secretary Hobbs, for all of your time and for making the time the day after the Brnovich ruling, and very much appreciate your insights into this.